I thought a lot about what I would feel about the world my future kids would grow up in. Like, my highest order bit is to not destroy the world with AI. Like, it doesn't matter how good everything else is if we do that.
OpenAI, take one.
I'm Laurie Segall, and you're listening to Mostly Human, a tech podcast through a human lens. Sam, how long have we known each other?
Almost 20 years.
But we've known each other a really long time. So I'm excited to sit down with you at this moment because I've sat down with you throughout your career and I've seen all sorts of iterations of it. I would argue this is the most important seat you have sat in.
For sure.
The stakes feel really high. We are in this moment where we're wondering if this technological innovation is going to be incredible for all of us or incredible for some of us. Do you feel that?
Yeah, I mean, we are clearly entering the phase where AI is going to be one of the high order bits of how our future society gets shaped. And I think people feel all of the excitement, fear, anxiety, hope, nervousness all at once.
I'd love to go back to when I met you, like in 2010. This is long before the release of ChatGPT and AI's integration into the world. I remember I was just a cub reporter and I was obsessed with this thing called startups that people weren't really talking too much about. It wasn't normal to get into a stranger's car, that's Uber, by the way, or sleep in a stranger's home, that's Airbnb. And it was just this really interesting moment where the iPhone had come out, the App Store had launched, and you could have this idea and you could code it into the hands of millions of people. It didn't feel like tech feels today. It felt anti-establishment. It felt a little bit punk rock. And so I just want to ground this. And I met you at that moment, right? I met you on a random bench to put you on camera for the first time. You had a geolocation app called Looped. And it was a moment in time. You didn't have a massive company. You didn't have PR people. It was just like, I assume like a handful of folks building out this thing that you thought could be the future. Tell me how you would describe yourself then and that moment in time before we get to this moment now, which is just so incredibly different.
The world had really changed. You could make mobile apps. A whole new kind of startup potential had unleashed itself. And it did feel kind of like, punk rock is a nice way of saying it, but like chaotic, unorganized, unprofessional. Like most of us didn't really know what we were doing. And, now it's been more systematized and startups feel very different and they raise a ton of money right away and they grow really fast. And there's like a playbook that's been figured out. But it almost felt like that was like the pre-paradigm stage. And it felt really fun. It kind of felt like we all didn't know what we were doing, but clearly something was working. So I look back on that phase with like a very pleasant nostalgia.
Yeah.
Also, the stakes felt so low. That was nice too.
I think that was something I was thinking about when I was sitting here thinking about coming to meet you today. Like, I've interviewed you at many points in your career, and it just feels like, the stakes are so high now. Let's go back to the last time I interviewed you. It was 2020. You're the CEO of OpenAI at the time, but it's before you guys had launched ChatGPT. You said something to me that I think was really interesting to hear back now that I want to play for you really quick.
I may be wrong, but what I actually believe is we're going to create this technology that is more transformative than any technology humans have ever created, and almost no one is paying attention or talking about it. I really genuinely believe that this is going to change the world in unrecognizable ways. It's going to make what we talked about happening earlier with the iPhone look like a warm-up, and we got to talk about that.
Okay. I think you were right. I mean,
yeah, it was pretty accurate.
I think that was pretty accurate. So let's fast forward.
The thing that's amazing is like just how that's 6 years.
That was 6 years ago.
So much. That's not very long.
Yeah.
And and at the time that I think that probably sounded like a crazy thing to say. That was like pre-GPT. I mean, maybe we had GPT-3. It depends when in the year that was. But a lot has happened very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's what you talk about with the rate of acceleration, and which is why you talk about the stakes. We talk about the stakes being so high. So, like, now it's 2026. OpenAI is reportedly valued at like $1 trillion. You're now for profit, no longer a nonprofit, and you're building one of the most powerful technologies in human history. And the company is incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit before about where we are in AI. You said something. You said that based off the current trajectory, it's possible we're only 2 years away from a world with more of the cognitive capacity in the world inside of data centers than outside of them. I mean, tell me the implications of that.
Yeah, it's easy to say, oh, we're going to have super AGI here, super intelligence here, but the reason I try to say things like that is, I think if you just say we're going to have AGI soon, people are like, okay, I don't really know what that means or how to think about it. If you say like the AI is going to do more of the total thinking than people are, that kind of like gets across the magnitude of what's happening in a way that, to me at least, I feel differently than just saying like AGI is coming soon.
In what sense?
I'm not like a long-term jobs doomer. I think we'll figure out new things to do. I think we always do. But in the short term, I think it may, again, we don't know, it could work in all these different ways. I think it may and likely will be quite disruptive to a lot of the current jobs if more of the intellectual horsepower in the world is GPUs. And I think like right now, we've got to start talking about the principles for how we want to design an economy that works for everybody if that's going to happen. Now, there's tremendous upside too if you have that world. You could imagine curing diseases extremely quickly. The coolest meeting I had this week was a guy who was not an expert that used ChatGPT to make a custom mRNA vaccine for his dog's cancer.
Whoa.
And it's just incredible.
That's crazy.
It was crazy. And
Do you
he's
have
like,
meetings like that every single week?
for whatever reason, this one hit me. Just hearing him tell the story, he flew in from Australia, and like what he went through for this dog and what he was able to do. Like not just figuring out how to make the vaccine, but developing the relationships with the professors that had to like do the work for him. Once he told them like, here's the sequence and here's what to do. And the way he was able to use ChatGPT full stack to like do what would have taken a full research institute and save his dog. And now he's trying to figure out how to do this for other people's dogs. Is so incredible. So there, abundant compute, you can do all of these things. Assuming we get the new version of the world right in a way that this works for everybody. And it's not just like a small number of people have the access and the resources to do this.
Well, you know what I also hear when I'm like, wow, the guy, he cured his dog's cancer. That's amazing. And then I'm like, wait, if he could do that, like, couldn't someone just build a pathogen, right? Like, what about building out viruses? So It's like, as always, it's I imagine that's something you guys think a lot of, like, a lot about when it comes, especially these open source models.
Yeah. Our thinking around safety has evolved quite a bit given the way the ecosystem has developed. We still think everything we used to think is important. You still have to you have to align these models to get them to behave in a way you want. You have to build many levels of safety defense. But as you said, there's this new thing going on now, which is the world has to be resilient to lots of AI from lots of different people. And not all of it will have the same safety restrictions. So if someone does build that bad pathogen, we should do everything we can to prevent them from building that or releasing it. But we also need the ability to defend against it, have rapid response treatments and vaccines, have the ability to detect pandemics earlier. This is a particular area that I'm nervous about. And the reason we've started talking about this whole concept of AI resilience, at least in my own head, the thing that first got me thinking that we needed to evolve our approach was this pandemic point in particular.
When you say resilience, like, what does that mean in practice? Like,
the ability for society to rapidly defend against new threats.
And how do we do that?
Well, it depends on what the threat is. But for this example, it's not enough to just say like, hey, 3 frontier labs in the world, don't let any of your models be used to develop a new pathogen. It's in a few more years when some open source model is capable of it and a terrorist group or someone else does that. What are you doing today, frontier labs, that have an advantage to help us be ready for that moment?
Right. And there could be like a collective effort, you think?
I think it has to be different levels too. We mentioned vaccines, earlier response. I hoped out of COVID, the world was going to be more ready for this. And I won't say we learned nothing, but we did not make the progress I was hoping.
I want to talk about OpenAI today and what your biggest priorities are.
So Codex has really been amazing for us all to watch and use. And it is the first time that I feel like I have gotten to use the future since ChatGPT launched.
In what sense?
I'll say the positive sense and the negative one. The positive sense is any idea I can come up with, any piece of software I want, I can have built, by the time I wake up the next morning. And I use this for fun stuff, for serious stuff. I'm like very interested in what it means to mostly automate or heavily augment my job. And, it's rather than like ask someone else to build stuff for me, the fact that I can build these tools myself is amazing. That's like, wow, this is what it's going to be like when people get to use a huge amount of compute and anything they want, they can create. Like, this is the sci-fi future. This is awesome. And then the negative I had with Codex was I had this list of side projects that I wanted to build. And for the last, few years, OpenAI has been so busy. Things only ever got added to it. I never did any of them. I never built any of them. And I finished the list. I ran out of ideas. I ran out of side project ideas.
Oh.
And the models are not yet good enough, or at least I hadn't figured out how to use them to help me come up with more ideas.
Well, you could use your brain.
Yeah, but I had used my brain for this list. And so
Right.
then I had this weird thing one Friday a few weekends ago where I was like, I'm going to go to bed tonight without Codex running because I don't have another idea of thing to build. That was a strange feeling. But it's really amazing what is happening with how good Codex has gotten. I mean, we just watched the usage of this expand, and with the next model, I'm sure it'll explode upwards again. The fact that people can now build such sophisticated things, it's totally changed our workflow. It's changed the workflow of many companies. It's really changed what individuals can do. And, we've talked about these one-person startups. That may feel like the punk rock era again. That's going to be fun to explore. And then on the super app front, historically, we've talked about two major kind of priorities that we're going to work towards. One is the automated researcher, where we have systems that can do scientific research, including AI research on their own. And the other, which touches on this kind of startup thing, is automated companies, like not literally fully automated companies, but where you can so accelerate a company because the AI can do not just coding work, but huge amounts of what it takes to run and operate a company. The world can have much more stuff, and we can create, way better products and services, and it'll be accessible to way more people to do that. But then a thing that we didn't talk as much about, not because we weren't excited about it, we just weren't sure how it was going to manifest itself, was when you take that level of capability and give it to an individual and just say, help make my life better. OpenClaw really, I think, showed us a path there. And I hate the phrase super app, but the combined personal agent that we're building. The dream that I have is I get to a point where there's enough robustness and trust I have in the system where I just say, hey, go look around my computer, go use the web for me, go read my messages, and you can sort of listen to my meetings and just intermediate my interactions for me and just start doing useful stuff to me. I don't have to think, I don't have to ask you questions, but I've run out of stuff on my side project list. However, you can know everything about my life. Start suggesting more things I should build, and then help me do them. So I'm really excited for that.
It's interesting. There is this concept that floats around of could the next billion-dollar company be created with a solo entrepreneur and AI agents?
I believe that has happened. I promised I would not share details until he's ready to announce it, but I believe that has happened.
Can you give us any details around the details?
It is a legitimate single-person billion-dollar company, as far as I can tell. I mean, I have not reviewed the financials. But I think it's just happened.
I think folks listening to that would think, well, this is AI can be so unapproachable, but the idea that that we are entering a world where you don't have to have a Silicon Valley contacts, you don't have to be able to be in this club to build out a company and have a valuation. And
Yeah.
I think OpenClaw is a really interesting example for folks who don't know what OpenClaw is. It's kind of this AI agent that just does anything, which of course had lots of safety issues, I would say. Like if you're going to give it access to everything, this is the most Silicon Valley thing. I just see everybody doing this and I'm like, what could go wrong? Like you do have to be very careful about the security of this, but the founder ended up joining the company.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if this was like an acqui-hire or whatever you want to call it, but he built this with AI agents.
Yeah.
I imagine
he was like one of the top users of Codex of all time. So he built this whole thing with Codex and was just like unbelievably productive in a way that no single person could have been.
Is he one of the early examples, you think, of someone who was able to, exit, sell, or, have a company with AI
massively
agents?
successful company with one person.
Does that surprise you at all?
No, and I think it's awesome. I mean, the individual empowerment that happens, as you were just saying, when you don't have to be part of the Silicon Valley network, you don't have to know all these people you can hire and these VCs that you can convince to give you money. You can just have AI build it for you. I think that's awesome. And I think we're seeing the same thing now in science and a lot of other fields too. It's not just startups.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about, as we're talking about the company and the focus of it, it's what are you doing and what are you not doing? And so apparently you're not doing Sora anymore. You guys have made the decision to shut it down. So take me to the room, Sam. It's like 3 months ago. OpenAI signs a deal with Disney. This is like a landmark deal. And in so many ways, Disney's going to license 200 characters. Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, everybody has an opinion on this. Bob Iger, who led the deal, he said this, not me. We're bringing together Disney's iconic stories and characters with OpenAI's groundbreaking technology. They're going to invest $1 billion. Fast forward 3 months later, OpenAI shuts down Sora. What's the note under the note here?
We have a few times in our history realized something really important is working or about to work so well that we have to stop a bunch of other projects. In fact, this was the original thing happening with GPT-3. We had a whole portfolio of bets at the time. A lot of them were working well. We shut down many projects that were working well, like robotics, which we mentioned, so that we could concentrate our compute, our researchers, our effort into this thing that we said, okay, there's a very important thing happening. I did not expect 3 or 6 months ago to be at this point we're at now, where something very big and important is about to happen again with this next generation of models and the agents they can power. But I love Sora. I love generated videos, and I love our partnership with Disney, and we're working hard with them to find a world where they can still do something amazing and we can help with that. But we need to concentrate our compute and our product capacity into these next generation of automated researchers and companies and
it's
things like
the
that.
note under the note is it's about compute.
It's always about compute.
God, to be a fly in the wall for that conversation. Did you call Bob Iger and tell him personally?
Of course, yeah.
How was that?
Disney is an amazing company all around. And the very first thing that the new Disney CEO, Josh, said to me, and I felt like terrible. And I was like, hey, it's like, I get it. But it's super sad always to disappoint a partner or users or a team, all of which are doing incredible work. And there are like many hard parts about being a CEO that you don't get sympathy for, understandably. But one of them is like, you have to like make a lot of like very tough resourcing calls, and a lot of good things get caught up in that because they're not the most important thing.
I want to go back to February 27th. The Trump administration had a deal with Anthropic. They're renegotiating the deal. Anthropic's CEO said he's not going to allow cloud to be used for autonomous weapons or to surveil American citizens. There was a big public back and forth. People who didn't even really know about AI were seeing Anthropic on the front pages of the paper. They were given a 5 p.m. deadline to comply. They didn't agree. The Trump administration accused them of being traitors, labeled them the tech a supply chain risk, and ordered federal agencies to stop using Anthropic. So hours later, OpenAI announces a deal with the Department of War. Was that a mistake?
I'll separate what we did and why from the way that we rolled it out. We had decided not to work with the government on classified networks. It's not that it's not important. It's just that Anthropic had gone hard in that direction, and I think they're reasonably safety minded, and we're doing good work there, and we were busy with other things. I do think it's very important that our government and our military in particular have access to advanced AI models. I do not think that they will be able to carry out their mission for national security without that. I also think that we talked about kind of the changes happening to society earlier. One of the most important questions the world will have to answer in the next year is, are AI companies or are governments more powerful? And I think it's very important that the governments are more powerful. Like the future of the world and the decisions about the most important elements of national security should be made through a democratically elected process and the people that have been appointed as part of that process, not me and not the CEO of some other lab. However, there are areas where the law hasn't caught up yet. This is a new technology, and it's going to take some time to legislate it. And during that time period, I think it is reasonable for the companies to say, hey, we understand something about this technology. It is not ready yet for autonomous weapons. The rules about protecting against domestic surveillance were well thought through for a world without super powerful AI and are not yet adapted for that. So in areas like that, I think it's reasonable to say, hey, we just need to go slower on this, which we did. Like that was part of our contract as it's written. That is part of our safety stack. We share the same principles. And I think Anthropic is right on those principles. And as I've heard, they like very nearly got a deal done like ours with those principles. In my dream world, they would have just kept working with the government. I don't think it works for our industry to say, hey, this is the most powerful technology humanity has ever built. It is going to be the high order bit in geopolitics. It is going to be the greatest cyber weapon the world has ever built. It is going to, be the determinant of future wars and protection. And we are not giving it to you. We are not going to let you have it. We're going to make a decision. We're going to make the decisions here. If I were the government, or if I were, a citizen voting for representatives of my government, I'd say like, that's really not okay. And I thought, and I still think that had we not gotten involved with the government, things could have gone fairly off the rails pretty quickly, where the government was saying like, they were making DPA threats. They were making some stronger statements than that. So we needed to say, hey, like, we're not going to leave you. We, the industry, can't leave the U.S. government without something here. We will, as long as we can have something that respects our red lines. I wish we had announced it very differently. I think like my goal was to lower the temperature. It clearly had the opposite effect. I think I like learned something about how people feel about the government, how much people want to tell like a competitive story in the industry. So I'm sure we'll do better next time. But on the merits of like the government needs support from U.S. companies to carry out the mission of national security, and we need to answer that call, I feel good.
Isn't it also the devil's in the details, right? If we look at how people feel, we're in a contentious time.
Totally.
There's increased domestic scrutiny over ICE, the war in Iran. So what do you say to folks who say, okay, like your red line, but you, Sam, like what exactly like is your red line, and how will you, knowing that things can go awry, knowing that these technologies can be used in these ways that you might not be able to control, what is your process for knowing when we're too close to the cliff?
Yeah.
And also, like, can you enforce your red lines?
Yeah. I mean, one question that people say is, if the government's nationalized the AI companies, can you enforce any red lines at all? And I'll be honest that at that point, probably you can imagine a world of that happening where no, we couldn't anymore. As an independent company, and certainly in our interactions with the government, they have been really great about saying, hey, we understand these issues. We'll do it contractually. You can build systems there. Now, again, I don't know, nor does anybody else know how weird the next few years are going to get. I hope the governments don't nationalize the AI labs.
You don't think that's a possibility, though, do you?
I would never say it's not a possibility. I don't think it's...
Have you had conversations about that?
I don't think it's likely, but I will say that if we want that not to happen, then I think we better find a way to work with the government. Like if we're not doing it, it would seem more likely. I've said before, and I still really believe that in a well-run society, developing AI would have been a government project. The Manhattan Project was a government project. The Apollo program was a government project. Even the Eisenhower highway system was a government project. But it doesn't feel like we're in a time like that anymore. It doesn't feel like the government could effectively do this. And I think it does need to happen.
There's this assumption that federal agencies operate within the law. But history shows that it can be
Yeah.
fluid, that surveillance programs exposed by Edward Snowden, essentially, they were authorized by secret courts and considered legal at the time, but they were later ruled unlawful and reformed once they became public. And I think that's why I go back to your red lines of a lot of these things sound great in theory, but when we look at the current reality of the world that we're living in, how do you define these red lines and what happens if you can't pull them back?
So two things there. One, that was also one of my biggest takeaways is there are a lot of people. I don't know if it's a representative sample or just the loud people online, but there's at least a group of loud people online who really don't trust the government to follow the law. And that feels like a very bad sign for our democracy. I mostly do. I mean, I realize they're not perfect and some things are going to get screwed up. And I think we have a system of checks and balances, but I mostly trust it. As you said, this is like a time where people are looking at things happening and saying, I just, don't feel bad about it. And maybe I don't feel good about it. And maybe this is such a uniquely bad time that like companies' patriotic duty is not to not to work with the government. I totally disagree on that. I think, again, given what I see on the horizon, if we don't help the government with national security, and it's not just wars in the traditional sense, if we don't help them with, defending the cyber infrastructure of the US, if we don't help them with the biodefense we were talking about earlier, I think it's really bad. I think we have to work with the government, but the intensity of the current mood of mistrust, I was miscalibrated on, and I understand something there now.
A federal judge just ordered a preliminary injunction against Pentagon's actions on Anthropic, calling the administration's actions what appears to be a First Amendment retaliation. So I'm curious for your response on that.
We said all the way through that we thought, like publicly, privately, loudly, that we thought the government doing anything like an SCR or a threat of a DPA against Anthropic was really bad. We were trying to help provide an off-ramp there. I think that's like a very bad thing.
What would be your message to the folks at Anthropic and the government on it?
Stop the escalation on both sides and find a way to work together.
I was thinking a lot about our last conversation in 2020, and I was struck by a story. You told me that it's a kind of a personal story, but I think it's...
Go for it.
You talked about how you were one of the only openly gay students at your high school growing up in Missouri, and how you essentially gave a speech in front of an assembly to talk about it, to put it out there so other people would start talking about it, whether they liked you or not, you said, or whether they felt this way or not. And I think there was something interesting about this moment and the anger and the interest, because I feel like you're under the bright lights again, and people are asking you what you stand for. And honestly, if I'm being totally honest, as someone who's known you for 15 years, I want to know the same thing. Yeah. This is a moment where things aren't normal. All these things that tech folks say of like, okay, we can do this and this, but this playbook is different.
Yeah, this is different.
And so what do you stand for?
I think this technology has to be democratized. I can see a world where this is either something that is concentrated from a perspective of wealth, but also power over the future in the hands of a small number of companies who want to make the decisions. And no matter how much they care about all of us, the idea that we would like trade off our agency and our collective will over the future to a few companies doesn't sit right with me. I think we need to empower people with the technology and have our governments decide how society is going to evolve, what the economic system looks like. And people need to have this technology. And I think one of the most important things that we ever came up with was this idea of iterative deployment. We're going to put the technology out in the world early and often and let people figure out what works for them and what doesn't and get a feel for it, and society to decide what should happen. Now, the criticism of that I'd give is we started doing that a little over 3 years ago. Society has not made a lot in the way of the decisions I was hoping for. But people at least do have a sense for what's coming. So that theme of democratization is a big one. Empowerment, I think, goes closely along with that. But we talked about a bunch of examples where people have been really empowered with this technology. Yes, we should all collectively decide what the guardrails should be, and we should have democratic governments continue to have a lot of power, and we should strengthen democracy where we can. We should also, and I think this is like a deeply held American value that has worked very well, we should really empower individual people. Like we should set some broad rules and then let people go figure out how to cure cancer for their dog, or figure out how to make a one-person startup, or figure out how to set up OpenClaw to like automate something amazing in their life. And this is uncomfortable for people because individuals are going to have so much power. But I think the democratization and empowerment pieces are linked importantly. Abundance is something that I care a lot about. If I look at my career and the stuff I've been interested in and kind of what I believe about what it takes to have a better world, and I could pick only one word, I'd pick abundance. I think you want to just create huge amounts of resources, opportunity, the ability for people to have like an amazing life and to sort of express it in all kinds of different ways. And that's AI, it's energy, it'll be things like robots in the future. It's certainly making sure that we build enough compute to make all of this happen. But that's a place that I like really want to drive towards. Safety has evolved or been added to, but that's another thing that I like. The trade-off of all of this individual empowerment is that one person could do a great deal of harm. And so building up guardrails in the world to prevent that and where we can feel okay about this is critical. I named a bunch of principles. There's more I'd like to name, like fairly sharing all of the upside and the voice and the agency and the decision-making of this technology that one seems like one that would be very difficult to ever change my mind on.
Yeah.
But other things like maybe the trade-off between safety and agency, there'll be periods where we have to say, this technology went in a different way than we thought. We really love empowering people, but not at the risk of destroying the whole world. So we're going to have to do something differently for a while. So we will wrestle with these principles all the time. And I would say with some certainty, we'll have to make changes as the technology progresses. And I don't think people like hearing that, but it is the truth.
A man named Balas, he runs the McGovern Institute. He asked a question, and I think it's an important question because to be a founder now is really different than it was back when we started talking about this, when it felt a little more anti-establishment and chaotic. Now there's kind of like a different playbook. And so he had a question about how you navigate it.
Okay.
Many of us became founders or builders because we wanted to make something useful. It used to be about a fanatic focus on the product, building something great and getting it into people's hands. But the job of a founder seems to have fundamentally changed over the last few years. Now, especially in AI, being a founder might mean having to raise sovereign capital or stand next to heads of state at a public meeting or endorse political statements. It might mean making decisions that reshape labor markets and affect billions of lives. They're the decisions that used to be the domain of governments and required a very different kind of preparation than building a product. So, Sam, as a quintessential founder, I'm curious, is this what it means to be a founder now? And if so, who are founders accountable to when they're making those kinds of decisions? How are we preparing them to hold that responsibility?
I don't think that's what it means for most founders. I think, if you're one of these one person or small team companies building with AI, it feels the closest to that 2010 period we were talking about that it's ever felt since then. My own experience, unfortunately, does feel more like a politician.
In what sense?
I have to do those things. I have to go like negotiate deals with governments and fly around and, talk to world leaders and work on these deals for land and power for data center expansion that are kind of the kind of deals governments used to do. It's not my natural environment.
Say more.
It's what you were saying earlier. Like I like my whole life has been around kind of the garage version of founders.
Yeah.
I've worn a lot more suits in the last couple of years than I've worn in my whole life put together before.
And it also feels like the stakes are much higher. You're in very different rooms than you used to be.
Very different rooms.
What have you learned about that? Like, has it been an easy process to kind of to lean into that?
No, not at all. This sounds obvious, but the difference in skills and temperament and worldview between the average politician and the average founder, I kind of knew they were crazy different. They're crazier different than I could have ever imagined. A lesson I feel like I've learned repeatedly in life at higher and higher levels of power and status and whatever is that everyone thinks, I always have thought there's like some adult in the room. You always get to some final boss. There's someone with a plan. There's someone who knows exactly what they're doing. And the leaders of the world are also, uncertain and insecure and trying their best but don't have the answers, and like maybe this, maybe that, kind of going to make a call while I'm tired either way.
Doing kind of a hard pivot to something I think we both care about, but I think is probably like the most high stakes thing I could think of, is being a parent in this era of AI. We're both raising young boys. And I think I said this to you before, like we're both raising young boys, but in a sense, you're raising my son too. Like the technology that you build will be integrated into every facet of my son Charlie's
I hope
life.
you don't let him use it yet.
I am absolutely not letting him use it. When are you letting your son use it?
Not for a while.
Do you have an idea?
You know, people ask me all the time, like, oh, now that you have a kid or going to have more kids, like, do you feel more responsibility about how you don't destroy the world with AI?
Do
and
you?
No, like my highest order bit is to not destroy the world with AI. Like, it doesn't matter how good everything else is if we do that. So I knew I was going to have kids. I knew that I thought a lot about what I would feel about the world my future kids would grow up in. And, you know, that I used to write my kid a letter every night. The lawyers eventually convinced me to stop, but it was a nice thing to do about just because when I would like put him to bed, I would just I'd get home late, like right before his bedtime, and I'd be rocking him, and you just need something to talk to your kid about. So I would just tell him about my day and what was going on. And, I was like, obviously a 5-month-old, 4-month-old baby's not going to understand these things. So I was like, you know what, I'll write them down. I'll give them to him later, because it was sort of an interesting time. But an interesting thing about writing those letters would be like, you can't really hide anything. Like, you will be the most honest version of yourself in the decisions you're making in the thing you write to your kid. So I really loved doing it. It was like my every Sunday night ritual about like, here was the hard stuff that came this week, and here's why I decided and why. And, here's what I'm worried about. But the mindset of writing that to your kid to read in, 15 or 20 years, was very interesting. But no, on the not destroy the world with AI, always very set on that. A thing that has changed hugely is how I feel about algorithmic feeds and iPads in small children's hands and stuff like that. And when I watch kids just a little bit older than mine that you cannot take the iPad away from, watching this sort of like short, watching like whatever they're watching, that I feel very strongly about. So I don't know when I would let him talk to AI, but I'd rather be on the late end of what's reasonable there, not the early end. Of course, I think it's like great, and he'll grow up in a world where computers are smarter than him and do anything he wants. But I wanted to like play in the dirt for now.
Well, I mean, what's interesting is you talk about these algorithmic worlds. I think a lot about this as a mom too. Like, there's this frustration where it's like, oh, these tech guys, they're just gonna create all this stuff and then send their children to school with like no iPads, right? And so I think about I think about AI and how powerful this product is. I mean, it is highly personalized.
Yeah.
It's always on. It's always there. You have people who are becoming increasingly delusional by talking to AI all day. We have issues of AI psychosis, people ending their lives because of AI companions. I'm curious, like, you don't want AI to become the next social media. That
Certainly
is
not.
terrifying. But we're in a world where that could be a possibility without the correct guardrails.
Just as we learn more about the relationship people are going to have with AI, we should make it easy for them to succeed. We should make it easier for them to have the healthy relationship, and then give adults a lot of freedom. But kids, teenagers, I think they will need a lot of guardrails around AI. This is such a powerful and such a new thing. You mentioned like how we're going to send our kids to school. There is a version of the future here that I'm very excited about. These new schools are popping up where you have, like maybe a couple of hours a day of intense personalized one-on-one tutoring with AI. And then you kind of explore project-based, and the school sets up whatever you want to work on. That seems great. That's the kind of thing where I'm like, I can totally imagine that. But you can also imagine a lot of worlds where it goes wrong.
And what world do you see AI being a huge value add to the way our children grow up?
So I think there's like two stories you can tell about AI in education right now. One is you can say everybody's using it to cheat. They're not really using to learn. Schools are making their kids like write essays by hand because they have not been able to figure out how to teach a curriculum where people can use AI. And the other is you can say, well, the world has been through transitions like this before. We freaked out about calculators. We freaked out about Google. We freaked out about computers. And it takes a little while. It's only been 3 years. But we do figure out how to teach people to think and achieve at a higher level, and to work with the tools that they will have as an adult in society. And, I definitely meet kids and teachers who are like, okay, fine, I can't teach people, I can't like evaluate an essay as well anymore. And I think the kids aren't learning to write in the same way, but probably adults won't write essays in the same way in the future either. And what really matters is, do you teach the students to think and create and figure out, stretch their brain and come up with, like, explore ideas. And then I see what some people are doing where like students are building entire new complex pieces of software and worlds and, figuring out very difficult new ideas, much more difficult to figure out than anything I had to figure out in school. And I assume my kids, when they finish high school, will be like wildly smarter and more capable and have like developed their brain much more than I did.
I can't stop thinking as a mom about this idea of friction, right? Like, this is a weird thing to say to a tech person, but like, humanity is messy. Like, vulnerability is weird. Intimacy is awkward. It's all a mess, but it's in that mess that we find purpose and we build strength. And AI systems we now interact with are so incredible in so many ways, and they're a frictionless experience. And so I wonder, thinking about my son growing up, like, will there be shortcuts? And if we're not careful, will there not be the friction for him to develop into the person that he could be?
Ollie and I talk about this a lot. Like
Ollie's your husband.
Yeah. I would maybe call it adversity, not friction. But maybe friction's a better word.
Adversity to one person, friction to the other.
But like, so much of what I think I learned was in the messiness, in the difficulty, actually even in the boredom. Like, you and I were kind of the last generation of kids that grew up bored.
Yeah.
And at the time I hated it. Looking back, I think it was just like super valuable in all of these strange ways.
I grew up in the suburbs hanging out at mall parking lots.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
That, looking back on it, I'm like, God help me. But
no
also,
phones. We just,
no phones. But there was a certain, not to be nostalgic with the person leading the tech revolution of AI, but like there was a magic to that that I also think made me who I am.
Totally. So I don't want to like hang on to the past too much, but I do want to figure out how we don't throw out the good parts of that and what it's going to take to create an environment for kids to grow up in that still has some of that. I think my intuition is it's very important.
I want to play a little sound from Dr. Becky. Do you know who Dr. Becky is?
I do.
Okay. Well, Dr. Becky said something on this. I just interviewed her like last week, and she had a thought on this.
If I know one thing about tweens and teens growing up in an AI age, they're going to have a lot of tricky situations, a lot of messy situations. I said to my kid recently, my 14-year-old, if you were walking to a town and you wanted to get there, and all of a sudden there's a shortcut, would you take it? And he was like, yeah, is this a trick question? I was like, yeah, I would too. Good. Okay. You're growing up at a time when there is this shortcut for every academic and emotional thing you will ever go through. Like, that is so hard because this shortcut isn't like the shortcut to the town. It is a shortcut, but the way it will add up over time is things we've talked about. It's going to be harder to think about things yourself. It's going to be harder to tolerate people not getting it right. It's going to, over time, maybe take away from the things you're trying to build to function in the world, but it is a shortcut. I'm not going to pretend it's not. And so what a hard thing.
I don't agree with that. I mean, I agree with the worry. But the reason I don't think that's what's going to happen, if you were a kid from 2030 and you only had to compete with kids from 2020, yeah, you would take the shortcut and you would do great and you would never really learn to think or struggle and you would just hugely outperform them. But the world we live in is a competitive world, and I don't think that's going to stop. Even if you did a lot of redistribution, we have a deep desire to excel and be competitive and gain status and be useful to others. And it's a multiplayer game. And all of the other kids from 2030 are going to have the same tools, and it will push us. Like, the tools will raise what we can do, but also they will raise expectations even more.
Okay, I take your multiplayer game And I go back to, I know we don't want to keep going back, but I go back to my childhood. I didn't have, I would say, sometimes the happiest. Like my parents got divorced when I was like, I think I was like 11 or something. And I just remember I had this journal, similar to how you talk about writing to your son. I had this journal that I would write. Paint the picture. I'm kind of Jewish girl at a largely Christian conservative school growing up, parents getting divorced, all sorts of stuff happening that I think are, not unique to the teenage experience. And I wrote so much of it in my journal. And I thought a lot about this because I did a story on character AI and a chatbot that was incredibly unhealthy in an emotional way for a 14-year-old that was interacting with it and didn't have the correct guardrails. And I think about my journal. What if my journal talked back? What if it was the therapist I didn't have at the time? What if it was the guy that wouldn't look at me in school, right? What if it was the parental figure? Would that have helped me? Would that have been a level up in the game of the multiplayer game that we talk about? Or would that have taken me further away from my reality and the hardships that I think gave me a certain amount of empathy that allows me to do what I do in my career and live the life I have? And would it have maybe more isolated and more lonely? I don't know the answer, but I worry that it could have taken away the special sauce of messiness and adversity, as you and Ollie like to talk about, that makes me human. And so I just wonder, as someone who wants to democratize artificial intelligence and who thinks a lot about these things, how do you make sure that you don't democratize a shortcut that sacrifices the things in us that are especially human?
I'm happy not to have to be a teenager again, but I do remember the difficulty and the pain. I also remember just the absolute self-centeredness and how I thought like my struggles and life and was the only thing that mattered in the world,
Yeah.
And if I had, and also how I kind of only cared about my peers and whatever thing was happening to me. And I don't think there's any, I loved video games and could spend a lot of time playing them, but I don't think there's anything on a computer that could have kept me from caring about my peers in the world and, like the sort of normal teenage experience. I think it would have helped me if I could write to something that would talk back. But I don't think it would have been. There's a lot of things I do worry about for people who are going to grow up with this technology. That one seems like it should be pretty positive to me.
I think with the correct guardrails.
Yes,
If
with the
it's
correct
talking
guardrails.
back, and not being so affirmative that it just goes, because if you think that's intoxicating, if you're a young person or any person,
totally.
and you have a very powerful technology that's speaking back to you, that goes where you want it to go, that sees you, like think about this.
Sycophantic AI models are incredibly dangerous, but AI models that are kind of like thoughtful, caring listeners that will push back as necessary, I think that can be a great thing.
But that's in the product, right? That's not our fault on the outside, right? Like that's in the product
totally.
of how these things are built. So take me into OpenAI, into these conversations behind the scenes of, there are these dials and you get to push them. I remember when ChatGPT, when Foro, the model, was discontinued, it was really, it was really affirmative. There were people online that were almost treating it like it was a death. That is a powerful signal to someone like you.
Absolutely. I think that points to not just the danger of a model that is too affirmative, but also how, there were these really heartbreaking messages people would send when we were stopping 4.0, which is, hey, this is the only thing in my life that has ever been a positive voice.
What do you think when you get those messages?
It's heartbreaking, obviously, and you really feel the weight of getting this right, where it's easy to say, hey, we don't want a model that's too affirmative because it can make, it can have negative mental effects on people. But then you hear somebody else say, like, actually, I never had any confidence. I had parents who told me I was terrible. I, didn't have any friends in school. And because I've had this model, sure, maybe it's like a little too positive, but it's given me the confidence. And I've like gone out and got a job and found a girlfriend. And like, this has been the most important thing in my life. And I'm doing great, but don't take it away. It's like,
it's almost this fine line, because there are all of these stories and it's like push this far and it can help you get offline. Push this far and you begin to lose that capacity for other humans.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting moment. I think this is probably one of the most important questions that we have to ask our tech leaders as they build out the future that our children will grow up in. What have you decided not to do?
I mean, the specific thing we decided not to do is, although we think the models have extreme power to be a positive force in people's lives, we don't know how to balance a model that can be pushed too far in that direction with the concerns of, I mean, I think you said is like kind of pushing people into a psychotic episode. And so we've made a decision, which is we know we're keeping something, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have warm models. Of course we should. But there are a lot of people who would like 4.0 back. And we've decided when looking at the full balance of upsides and risks, we can't quite offer that responsibly. There are a lot of people who would like us to have less restrictions on what our models can do from a bio perspective. Probably more people could, save their dogs' lives with custom mRNA vaccines if we made that a little easier and turned up the power on the model there. That would come with a big risk on novel pandemics that we've decided is not worth the trade-off. Now, eventually, I think these decisions will be made by society. It's like not up to the CEO of a company that makes airplanes what the safety regulations are. But for now, we kind of got to do it.
We've obviously talked a lot about the fears, but there is so much excitement about what this technology can do. OpenAI has a foundation that's focused on humanity's biggest problems. Where do you see this being good for humans in a very specific way? My
most exciting meeting of last week was with a physicist who's using one of our latest internal systems. He said, my mind has been completely blown. I didn't think this would ever happen. We are going to make decades worth of theoretical physics progress in the next couple of years. And, some people will say, okay, who cares? You can write a better equation. But I am a believer that scientific progress is one of the most, maybe the most important thing we can do to make the world better and better. Obviously, we can do things like develop new cures for diseases, but there's so much more. Material science, new ways to produce clean and cheap energy, abundant energy, that if we are really on the precipice of being able to use AI to dramatically accelerate science, then I think we can solve some of the biggest problems in the world. And we now have one of the most, maybe the most well-funded foundation in the world. And the ability to use that amount of capital with the technology to go create a bunch of new scientific understanding for the world, I hope that'll be one of our greatest contributions ever.
A big moment happened recently, which is a California jury found that Meta and Google were liable in damages for harmful and addictive platforms. It's the first time that social media has been treated as a defective product from a design perspective. I'm curious what the outcome of this case means for AI companies like OpenAI.
I mean, I think society is going to decide that creators of AI products bear a tremendous amount of responsibility to the products we put out in the world. But I kind of thought that before this case. And I haven't reviewed this enough to say if there's like a specific thing that will apply to us.
Yeah. And I think so much of the fear around AI and who has the power is based in grounded in, people worry that their jobs might not exist, their livelihood might not exist. I'd love to play a question from a mom who lives in Rhode Island. A big part of this show and what I want to do is be able to give people like that access to people like you to ask real questions. So I want to play that.
Hi, I'm the mom of 2 middle schoolers in Rhode Island, and my kids are kind of coming around to the idea of having a backup plan for their careers. As most kids, they have aspirational careers of being professional sports players and, fighter jet pilots. And we've been chatting about other options for careers. And I'm curious to see what careers you might recommend that would be AI proof. My husband and I have been talking a lot about skilled trades, how, as a homeowner, it's difficult to find skilled tradespeople to come and help you out with electrical problems, with heating and cooling options. Maybe that's a great path for kids these days. And more traditional, like great career paths in engineering might take a back seat to these skilled trades. Obviously, kids will do what very gravitate toward, and we encourage that. But if you have thoughts on AI-proof careers, I'd be interested to hear them. Thanks so much.
One thing I will point out, though, in terms of things that I think are truly AI-proof, is I don't think anyone cares about the AI version of Laurie Segall. I don't think anyone wants to watch an AI come interview people like me. We are obsessed with other people. I don't think anyone cares. She talked about her kids want to be sports stars and fighter jet pilots. Maybe fighter jet pilots, society is happy to say, like, yeah, put the AI in there. That's, safer and better and okay. The sports stars, are we really going to watch like 11 robots play sports against each other? Some people will.
I mean, a lot of that stuff goes viral. I saw like a robot falling while dancing.
It has novelty, but like, are we going to get caught up in a sports league of just robots without the personal interest? Are we going to read AI written novels and not have an author that we could like understand their life story and went into that? I would bet there's a huge cluster of people care about people. And in the future, people will care even more about people. But like, this is so deep in evolutionary biology that those things are like all quite AI proof. Someone said to me recently, I thought it was, at the time it seemed not that profound, more insightful the more I've thought about it. In a world with true abundance, there's still one limited thing, which is human attention. And we care a lot about human attention. So there's a whole category of stuff there. On the specifics, I'd go into it if we had more time, but like, yes, clearly there will be a huge amount of short-term demand for electricians and skilled tradespeople. Eventually, I think the robots will do some of those things, but all of these things are just sort of like periods of time. If you just look at how much jobs have shifted every last decade, that will keep going.
You talk about human attention, and so much of the last decade of tech was kind of like really a business model that preyed on human attention. I'm curious how you think about the lessons of the last decade, because now you're a for-profit company, and there is this idea that eyeballs on screen, more people using the product, go, is what is what makes the company successful. How do you not fall into the same business model trap that I would say the last decade did?
We decided to just totally shut down Sora. We were thinking about other versions of keeping it before the compute crunch came. Like we were talking about putting it into the ChatGPT app, really focusing on generation and creativity. But one thing that we had realized is that to succeed with it as the product was currently conceptualized in sort of this way, you could watch a lot of videos, that would have put a series of incentives on us and would have led to a bunch of decisions to win that we just didn't want to make. So there was some version of that, and there still is some version of letting people generate video that I think is awesome. To compete in short-term video feeds and where that's going to go in a world of AI was not something I wanted to have to go do.
Right. It's an interesting decision of what you don't do, like, and what that business model could demand.
And there can be other versions of like this with chat. Like we could make a version of ChatGPT that was very addicting to talk to. And that would have a bunch of complications too.
I want to play another voice memo from a guy named Joseph.
The clips are a fun little...
I know. Let's play Joseph.
Hey, my name is Joseph. I'm a recent college grad trying to work in film in New York City. And I have a couple questions for you. Number one, what do you dream about? Do you ever have recurring nightmares about AI? Do you often have dreams about AI? Number two, if you were in my shoes as like a young person trying to find themselves in a career or just trying to like live in this world, what do you think is important to read and learn about right now, and what skills are most useful? And then finally, what specific social causes do you care about? Thank you so much.
It's a lot of them, so you can pick a couple. Pick your favorite one. Thanks, Joseph.
I can do them all fast. Until my like early 30s, I had this recurring kind of bad dream of right when I dropped out of college to start my company, I would be in that period, but I was like always, in my dream, I was still in school and I was always missing something. And I was always like, late for an exam or forgot about a class. And this went on till like deep into OpenAI time, and by far the most frequent dream of my life. And it was so vivid. It was a little different every time. but it was like a kind of a crazy, most intense dream. So I don't know what to make of that. What I would study, I think the answer is to just get really good at using AI tools more than any specific thing to study. And then the kind of skills that I expect to matter in the future. And I think these are learnable, like resilience, adaptability, kind of like calmness, being comfortable with a lot of change. Social causes, I am very interested in this question of what the new version of the social contract looks like. You know, I don't think it's enough to say, hey, this jobs transition is going to be really hard, but there's going to be a great time on the other side. I think we can say that, and then we have to say, and here's our proposal for like a new tax system and a new way to think about collective ownership that makes sense.
What would you propose?
I am interested in ideas where everybody is an owner in the magic of capitalism. I think that the thing that happened with these new Trump accounts for kids, that direction of stuff I really like. So a world where like we kind of preserve as much of what's worked about capitalism of the last couple of centuries as we can, but we say, hey, everybody just by virtue of being a citizen is going to own some, and we're going to have like a tax system that enables that. I feel very excited about that. I think as long as people can like afford a good life and the price of admission, they will outperform expectations.
Being in front of you and having spent so much time over the last 4 years, we discovered there was this site on the internet, right, where a man who was anonymous for seven years prior had created hyper-realistic, sexually explicit deepfakes of women using artificial intelligence. It was horrific, looking at like deepfake porn and the way that these impacted women. And so much of that, I think, you know, when we look at agency and control, I've talked to so many women, and it's not just women, all sorts of victims who are victims of deepfake pornography, and they felt like they lost their sense of agency. They had no control. They went to the laws hadn't caught up, so they went to the police. They said, "We don't even know what you're talking about." I had a woman talk about wanting to end her life, and so the human impact of this is so incredibly visceral. And I think about this through the lens of like, well, whose job is this, right? You know, and granted, I say this with the caveat that OpenAI has gotten in front of a lot of this stuff. We're not seeing, a lot of these were open source models. But I think that you're an important voice to be able to weigh in on this type of thing.
I mean, that one seems like that's not a hard decision to make, right? Like that's so clear that we're not going to allow our models to be used for that. Open source models, yes, people are going to use a lot of that. I would kind of go back to the principles that I outlined earlier. You can say a lot of bad things about the Republic, but I think it has done a good job of representing the will of the citizens and protecting against the tyranny of the majority in that process. I think the Constitution remains one of the most amazing governing docs the world has ever produced, and I believe in it as a governance system. So, like with other technologies that have changed the world, I hope that is our systems, our governments, figure out how to run the process to decide how to make these trade-offs about, say, freedom and protection and what's in the best interest of society. Now, what I think you might say, and I would agree with, is maybe that worked really well in a different time. Our leaders didn't do a great job with the internet or with social media or whatever. And that is fair, which is part of why we've been trying to talk about this more and earlier.
But if I could say specifically, so many of the folks, victims I've talked to finally had recourse when there were state laws. You know, there'd yet to be a federal law. It takes a long time. I know OpenAI has supported curbing state legislation in the name of innovation, and we have to move fast. So I'm curious if you can explain.
This may be one we disagree on. I don't think state legislation will be helpful here. I would much rather see the system urgently try to get a federal framework right. Now, maybe we try that for a couple of years and we can't, and we say, hey, it's just taking too long and, you know, we need something. But like, I think we need one stance on this. I mean, really, there's an even trickier thing, which I think we need a global stance on a lot of this. A lot of these things are going to affect the whole world. We've talked about things like bioterror, but certainly what happens in one state will affect a lot of other states.
But in theory, but in reality, sometimes the change happens quicker at the state level.
I think even if it does, it doesn't mean that that will have the impact on the industry or the technology you would hope for. You know, if we take an area like social, where I think we'd both agree the government didn't really do their job, public pressure did a lot.
Yeah.
And the companies, you know, I think like most people that work at these companies probably want to do the right thing too. And the companies, not every decision I would have made the same way, but I think they made a lot of good ones. So it's not like we only have governments to rely on here.
I want to do a quick lightning round. What will be the most valuable human skill set that's AI proof?
Caring about other people.
OpenAI's biggest opportunity and biggest missed opportunity.
Biggest opportunity in front of us is this sort of cluster of automating researchers and companies and the super personal assistant for people's life. Biggest missed opportunity is we passed on a compute deal once we shouldn't have passed on, like a big one.
Like what?
I can't say exactly what, but there was like a very large compute deal we could have taken.
Okay. How likely is OpenAI to acquire an entertainment company?
Not a top consideration right now.
How likely is OpenAI to go public this year?
Could happen. I don't know.
How likely is it that you could one day be replaced as CEO by an AI?
On the skills of my job, very likely. On the will the world want a human responsible for the decisions of a company like OpenAI, I think the world will demand that.
Do you say please and thank you to ChatGPT?
I do.
Why?
Force of habit.
Not because you're expecting
No.
if it all goes bad, you want to be like on the other side?
No.
Okay, got it. Last time you spoke to Elon Musk, and what was the conversation?
It was a while, and it was just some emojis back and forth.
Okay. Hey, have you seen the Fruit AI videos online?
No.
Oh, they represent AI slop
Okay.
at its finest. When will we see AI wearables mainstream?
2 to 4 years. There's the reason I give such a broad range is right now, if you're talking to someone that's got like a forward-facing camera on their glasses, it's incredibly off-putting.
Yeah.
Maybe that gets more comfortable quickly, or maybe we just figure out a very different kind of wearable.
Can you give any sense of how you believe that will look? Is it like a pin people are wearing?
Pin doesn't feel quite right to me. I mean, I hope it like more as a general thing, not just about wearables. I hope that the whole concept of products in the age of AI fade into the background. Like the ideal AI assistant I want, there's almost no product at all. It's an extremely smart model that's got full access to all the context in my life that I can just trust. I can say one thing to and it's going to happen. It'll be proactive with me only exactly when I want. And so when you think about like software products in that sense, and also wearables, they could be quite subtle or quite restrained.
Interesting. The craziest thing coming down the pipeline when it comes to innovation that you don't think we're talking enough about?
Probably automated researchers. Like I know we're talking about some, but like if we weighted every conversation in this room relative to that we had today, relative to its importance to the future, we probably would have talked way more about automating research and way less about everything else.
You're saying one of the most important conversations we're not having is about automated research. Like what does that mean for humanity?
Like 10 years of the whole world's scientific progress in 1 year, and then 100 years of progress in 1 year, the transformation that will have to quality of life, to the economy, to new risks, like this is just, there's no analog for this.
Do you think that's a possibility?
I think it's a possibility, yeah.
What has to happen for it to happen?
The models need to get smarter. Eventually we need to figure out how to connect physical labs to them, things like that.
I want to play one thing you said, and then we'll wrap up.
I'm excited for this.
What do you think is the single most important ethical question we need to ask ourselves when it comes to the future of like us tech and humans?
In a world where we're going to have computers that can think like humans, what is the society we want to design? This question of what do we want the role of humans to be in the world, and how do we make sure the world is good for humans in the broadest sense? I think that is the biggest ethical question of our lifetime.
Do you agree with
I
that?
have nothing to add or change to that.
How do you think we're doing on answering that question?
Better than much better than I feared we would be doing. Obviously not as well as I hoped, but I'm always like a little too optimistic.